We're talking Leafs today. A follow-up to last night's big loss, 6-1. It puts the Leafs in a tough position closing out this series with the Florida Panthers. We're going to give you the Hub's treatment of all the gory details with Sean Speer, my co-founder and Leafs fanatic. Sean, great to have you on the program.
Yeah, thanks, Roger. It's a bittersweet. I'm glad to speak with you, but I wish we were talking about something else than the Leafs predictably letting us down in the playoffs as they've done for the better part of the past 9 years, and of course now approaching nearly 60 years since they last won the Stanley Cup.
Yeah. Well, I want to give this the typical Hub treatment, which is to basically skip over whatever the media has been talking about this devastating loss last night and focus on economics. Because I don't know, Sean, I got a bad vibe here that the reason the Leafs are once again going to blow it and not make it to the Stanley Cups and crap out of the playoffs isn't because somebody didn't make a shot. Yeah, that's all important. But in fact, there's some weirder, like macroeconomic things that are going on around this hockey team that in some ways to me speak to like some of the inherent challenges that face Canada, that face our own economy, that kind of lead Canada not to win, the playoffs, if there is one, of, G7 economies. So I know you have some thoughts on this. Let's dig into them.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about along these lines because I think you're right. Economics is really at the heart of what's played out in Leafland over the past several years, but then more broadly in the NHL in ways that, as you say, I think have insights about Canadian competitiveness, particularly when it comes to talent. Just on the big picture with respect to Leafs, because I think this is interesting. In a way, Roger, the Leafs roster construction should be understood as something of a decade-long experiment. Listeners and viewers will know that the NHL has a salary cap. In effect, the team is trying to manage scarcity and trying to optimize for scarcity. And what's fascinating about the Leafs roster construction and its salary cap distribution is it has gone about dedicating more than 50% of its salary to four players. One way to think about it, Rudyard, is that of the 12 highest cap hits in the NHL, four play on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Of the remaining eight, there is not a single team that has more than one player in the mix. And so I think what a lot of Leaf fans are coming to the conclusion of just in the aftermath of last night's defeat is that there's this inherent imbalance to the construction of the Leafs roster, to the distribution of scarce resources, such that it may be impossible to win a Stanley Cup when you're so top heavy and so dependent on a small number of players for your ultimate success. And so I think what you're seeing, even just in recent days, as commentators saying, in effect, the Leafs need to revisit the underlying economic assumptions behind their roster construction. In effect, take the salary cap and distribute it more broadly across the roster, as opposed to dedicating so much of it to four players. Because if that's what you do, of course, you sink or swim with those four players. And so far in this playoff season, the Leafs are most definitely sinking.
And there's Matthews in the photo. He's been a big disappointment. I mean, let's just be honest. Maybe there's some talk. Maybe he's playing injured, some longer standing injury coming out of the season. So like, I don't want to throw the guy under the bus, but he's one of these players, right, Sean? Like they've spent a big portion of what their budget is making a bet on a guy like Matthews. And then when he doesn't perform, especially in a critical game like last night, boy, you really have a problem because there isn't that depth to pick up the pieces when Lady Luck isn't smiling on you.
Exactly. Matthews himself has the single largest cap hit in the NHL. And so in a way, building an NHL team is like managing scarcity in any other part of the economy. And as you say, I think the use of the word bet is appropriate here. The team has effectively bet that if you run this over enough times, that if you bet on dedicating a majority of your resources to a set of highly talented forwards, that talent will ultimately win out. And I think having now done this for approaching 9 seasons, it's become increasingly clear that that roster composition, one that is so top heavy, Rudyard, just isn't working. One thing that's really extraordinary, think about this for a minute.
Yeah.
Last night, the Leafs, as you reminded me, only scored 1 goal. The player who scored it, Rudyard, makes roughly $700,000 a year.
Wow.
And the reason that is, of course, is because they have to backfill their roster with players who are close to the league minimum because so many of their top-end players are making north of $10 million a year.
Wow.
You juxtapose that with some of the other teams in the league who've been able to take those scarce resources and dedicate them more evenly across their rosters. And what's fascinating, and this strikes at the broader point of Canadian competitiveness and public policy, one reason that the teams like the Florida Panthers are able to do that is because their top players, Rudyard, aren't pushing to kind of maximize their own salaries because they live and work in tax environments where their take-home pay, even after tax, can be higher than players on the Toronto Maple Leafs because the Leafs players and others in Canada are subject to such high marginal effective tax rates.
Yeah, let's go deeper on that because that's such an interesting point. It's not simply that players want to be on the Florida Panthers because the weather is great and then all year long. It's because the state of Florida has made a series of decisions about state taxes that then have a big impact on, in a sense, the after-tax position of that player. So it allows the Florida Panthers basically to go, is it true, Sean? Like, in effect, beyond the cap. They have a package that they can present these players that effectively makes their team more desirable for that person to go to and gives them, in effect, a bigger tax-enabled cap for that management team to play with.
That's precisely right. It's not an accident, Roger, that the Florida Panthers won the Stanley Cup last year. They were in the Stanley Cup Finals the year before. It looks like, all things being equal, they might be back there again. Another top team in this year's playoffs is the Dallas Stars, who similarly benefit from a zero state tax in the state of Texas. The Dallas Stars similarly have been a strong team in the salary cap era. And what that enables them to do, Rudyard, is to convince their players to effectively accept a lower share of those scarce resources because even though their salaries pre-tax might be lower than the salaries of some of the top Toronto Maple Leafs players, their after-tax incomes are actually the same or possibly even higher. And in a world of scarcity, when every team is basically bucking up against the salary cap, if you can get a player for $8.5 million like Sam Reinhart, who's been extraordinary for the Florida Panthers over the course of this series, versus someone like Mitch Marner, who, when his contract expires this season, is going to be asking for upwards of $13 million. That $5 million delta, Rudyard, is the equivalent of a really good player.
Yeah.
And so, as I say, in that sense, I think it's really important to understand the interaction between the scarcity imposed by the cap and then the tax environment in these different jurisdictions, which is enabling teams in low tax jurisdictions to stretch their cap dollars even further than the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Okay, let's bring this all back to Canada to make our audience go wild here. Because basically, Sean, where go the Leafs? Go Canada. I don't know. Am I right? Like, in effect, we've got a talent problem here because we've got a tax problem. And then we've got, maybe a typical kind of, approach here in Toronto, which you've got this almost like monopoly of this team that has this massive fan base, that we never got a team in Hamilton to maybe create some competitive pressure. So the Leafs are kind of feel a little bit like the oligopolies that, are rooting and running wild through the Canadian economy. I don't know. Look, I'm stretching things here, but I worry, Sean, that the Leafs are like at the canary in the coal mine. This is symptomatic of some of the inherent challenges around talent, around competition, and just around an attitude of kind of entitlement when you don't have either a franchise or a company or, dare I say, a political party. Wow, I'm really getting out here now. feeling like they're under pressure and they have to perform and they have to make decisions that are actually over time going to yield results. Because this is getting bizarre, isn't it, Sean? Just how serially, I don't know how you express it, but just how the Leafs keep losing. Like 9 years they've been on this strategy. It's not working. They haven't won a Stanley Cup in 6 decades. I mean,
yes,
you can't just put this all down to chance.
Yeah, well, I think your point about the broader applicability to Canadian public policy and Canada's economy is so well taken. You know, if I've emphasized one thing so far in our conversation, is that each team could only pay players essentially the same amount. That's in effect a consequence of the salary cap, and in that environment, the taxes play a key role because they can change the dynamic for teams such that they can stretch those cap dollars further. In a way, it's even worse in the broader economy, Rudyard, because those Canadians who move to the United States for work not only oftentimes are benefiting from more competitive tax rates, but on average, they're also earning a lot more. So you put those two things together. You can stay in Canada, earn less, and pay higher taxes, or you can move to Florida or Texas or other parts of the United States, boost your pre-tax income, and be subjected to lower overall tax rates. So if this mix is harming the Toronto Maple Leafs in a way, Rudyard, it is even more detrimental to the broader Canadian economy, in which we have both, we underperform on the income side and we overtax on the taxation side. In a world in which talent matters a great deal and people are worried about the so-called brain drain, including with respect, incidentally, to new immigrants who are coming to Canada and quickly moving on to the United States or other more dynamic and competitive jurisdictions, I think it's terribly important that we get at the heart of these problems. We're living in a populist moment. It's not easy to talk about tax rates, particularly for high earners. But if the Toronto Maple Leafs are indeed the canary in the coal mine, Canada's lack of tax competitiveness, particularly for high-skilled professionals, including professional athletes, it represents a detriment to Canada's capacity to compete and win in the global economy, and the Toronto Maple Leafs' capacity to compete and win for the Stanley Cup.
Hey, I love it. We either severed the Gordian knot or squared the circle. I don't know, pick your metaphor, but this is exactly the conversation I hope to have with you, Sean, and I feel for you. I know you are a long-time, diehard Leafs fan, and this next game, I understand you may not watch it. You just simply might not be able to bring yourself to the cruelty that this team imposes upon you and countless other fans each and every year.
Yeah, one of the virtues of living with such disappointment is one's expectations are low. But this one, it really hurts a lot, Rudyard, because as we've talked about over the past couple of weeks, the Leafs start this series up 2-0, and the probability that a team with a 2-0 lead wins the series ultimately was something like 90%.
Wow.
Having now lost 3 consecutive games and having the series flip to now they are in a do or die situation down 3-2, the probability that they win the series is down below 40%.
Wow.
So the Leafs have, for all intents and purposes, are the authors of their demise. And at the core, I mean, just to wrap up the conversation, it's really rooted in the fact that the Leafs have such a lopsided construction of their roster, rooted in part because of some of these issues we've been talking about. And when Matthews and Marner and Nylander and Tavares, the core four as they're called, don't perform, the Leafs simply can't win.
Yeah, snatching defeat from the jaws of victory could be the team slogan for the Leafs.
Yes, this is as I say, something I told you that on Sunday night in game 4, my oldest said to me rather, "Daddy, why don't we just cheer for the other team?" I think he might be on to something.
Ouch, ouch. Well, Sean, thanks for coming on Hub Hits today. And viewers and listeners, if you enjoyed this type of programming where we take stories like the Leafs' big defeat and try to look at them through, bigger lenses, through bigger issues and ideas, well, subscribe to our channel. Click on that little notification bell. If you're on YouTube watching, you'll get our latest videos delivered to you. And finally, if you're listening on our podcast feed, please write a review, share this program with friends and family. We really appreciate it. Until the next time, I'm Rudyard Griffiths saying bye-bye.